Hi everyone, today we are going to be discussing the human skeletal system. First, we are going to discuss the elements that are involved in the axial skeleton. There are two types of skeletons, the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. But first we're going to discuss the axial skeleton. Included in the axial skeleton is the skull, all of the vertebrae in the vertebral column, the rib cage, sternum, sacrum, and coccyx. So first we're going to discuss the skull. The skull is made up of 22 bones, and there are also 3 additional bones in each ear known as the ear ossicles. And there are 2 categories that skull bones can be placed under: cranial bones and facial bones. The cranial bones are the ones towards the upper part of the skull, so including the frontal bone, the 2 parietal bones, the 2 temporal bones, and the occipital bone, and then the rest are underneath facial bones. Next, we're going to discuss the spine, or also known as the vertebral column. There are 26 vertebrae that make up the spinal column, and there are 5 different categories that these bones can be placed under. The 3 types of vertebrae are cervical, thoracic, and lumbar vertebrae. Included in the cervical vertebrae are the atlas and the axis, C1 and C2, and they are placed right underneath the skull. The way that I remember that atlas is C1 and axis is C2 is that T comes before X in the alphabet, and that always helps me remember which one comes first. So the cervical vertebrae includes 7 vertebrae, so that the names are C1 to C7 for short. Next is the thoracic vertebrae, and this is where the ribs are concentrated as well, and there are 12 vertebrae, so you would name those T1 to T12. And then next are the lumbar vertebrae. Those ones are the biggest vertebrae, and they're located right above the sacrum, and there are 5 of them, L1 to L5. And then in the sacrum, there are multiple bones, but as we age, they fuse together to make one sacrum. And that goes for the coccyx as well. It begins as 4 bones, but as we grow into our adult age, it becomes 1. Next is the ribs and the sternum. There are 24 total ribs, 12 on each side, and they can be put into 3 different categories: true ribs, false ribs, and floating ribs. The true ribs are ribs 1 to 7 and are connected to the sternum, and the false ribs are ribs 8 to 10 that are not connected directly to the sternum but are connected to the cartilage of the upper ribs 1 through 7. And finally, floating ribs are the smallest ribs, 11 and 12, and they're floating ribs because they are not connected to the sternum whatsoever. Now to the sternum. In the picture, you can see a few labeled parts, but we're going to focus on the manubrium, the body, and the xiphoid process. These are the 3 separate bones that make up the sternum. So now we're going to make our way to the appendicular skeleton. This is the skeleton that's going to include your upper limbs, your lower limbs, your shoulder girdle, your pelvic girdle, hands, and feet. So first, let's go over the upper limbs. There are 64 bones that make up the upper limbs. There are 10 shoulder and arm bones, which is 5 on each side, and these include the clavicle, scapula, humerus, radius, and ulna. And then there are 16 wrist bones called carpal bones, 8 on each side. the scaphoid, lunate, hamate, triquetrum, trapezium, pisiform, trapezoid, and capitate. The description is not in the exact order that these bones sit, but a fun way to remember it is if you look at this picture down at the bottom with the color coordinated bones, you can see that it can create an anagram so that you can remember it well. This was how I remember it. So starting at the orange scaphoid, we're going to make our way over to the blue, green, yellow, and back with the purple, light blue, red, and dark green. The way I remember it is straight line to pinky. Here comes the thumb. It's just an easy way to keep those bones in the right place. Just an easy a memory trick. And then finally, there are 38 bones in the hand itself. And that is 19 on each side, and that includes the metacarpals and the phalanges. In the phalanges, you will get your 3 different types of little baby bones, tiny, tiny bones, that are the distal, intermediate, and proximal phalanges. And they're just little bones that people sometimes forget about, but they're there. Sorry about that. Now we're going to go back to the lower limbs. So there are also 64 bones in the lower limbs. So it's starting to add up to 206, even though it doesn't seem like it sometimes. First, we're going to discuss the os coxa, which is more commonly known as your hip bones, and they're made up of 3 other bones that are the ilium, ischium, and pubic bone. And you can make your way through that image at the top. It'll show you in relation where those 3 bones are and where they sit in your body. Next is 8 leg bones, your femur, patella, tibia, and fibula, 2 on each side. Your femur is the big bone connected to your hips, and the patella is also known as your kneecap. And then you've got your tibia and fibula, excuse me. So next is 26 bones in each foot. There are 7 tarsals on each foot, which is a lot like the hand wrist bones, but these bones include your calcaneus, which is like your heel bone, your talus, navicular, lateral cuneiform, medial cuneiform, and intermediate cuneiform. On the next page, I have a better picture where you can see where those are located side by side in the correct position. And then finally, there are 19 metatarsals and phalanges, just like your hands. They are very, very similar. And these also include the intermediate, distal, and proximal phalanges as well. So finally, here's a nice little picture, a lot like the hand, but there are less tarsals than there are carpals. I just wanted to give you guys a nice little view of how these bones articulate, and articulate is another word for the way they fit together. So that is the end of this PowerPoint. Please feel free to do your own research. Be prepared to come to class tomorrow and take a quiz. It's just going to be as a little pre-assessment to what you've learned in this video. And please come to class prepared with any questions. And I hope you have a great rest of your night. We'll see you tomorrow in class.